Well, let's go ahead and get started in the essence of time. I am so glad that all of you are here and joining us for our last OEI workshop series. This is the Flying Solo series. And in a moment, for Reed and Eleanor, who are the creators of the series, they're going to be introducing themselves, laying the foundation for the series, and then orienting you to today's content and guest presenter, Dawn House. So this is part one of a three-part series designed for contractors, artists, freelancers, consultants, and anyone building a business of one. And we'd love for you to sign up for the second and third workshop sessions on Eventbrite. So here in a moment, I'll drop that link in the chat for you to see. In the meantime, if you're able to, we would love if you could turn on your camera as we work through introductions and get started. It's always great to see everyone's faces if possible. And as always, if you have questions, we encourage you to place them in the chat and we'll address them at the end of the session. With that, I'm going to pass it off to the creators of this series, Eleanor and Fareed. Take it away.
Thanks, Madison. So the series that we are starting today is all about this idea of the solopreneur. And this is your person who's working for themselves, your artist, your freelancer, etc., and who doesn't necessarily feel the need to scale up. You want to be close to the work, you want to have that creative control, and you're happy working with yourself or in an incredibly small system. And so today we're going to hear from artist Dawn House, who has been a solopreneur long before anyone said a word like solopreneur. And he's going to give us a history and overview of his work and his life. And then next week, we're going to have a presenter who will work through the paperwork, the taxes, the financial planning. And then in our third week, we'll hear from a friend of Fareed's, and I'll let him give an overview of that before we pass it over to Dawn.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eleanor. My name is Fareed Nouri. I'm a first-year full-time MBA student. I'm from Afghanistan, and my solopreneur journey, I'm a competitive mountain biker and burgeoning published writer. And that's what I hope to continue taking forward. And that's where my interest with getting involved with organizing these series was found. The third week of the Flying Soul series will be Ted King, who will be talking to us about branding. So if you have a talent, how do you go about establishing relationships with companies that you help grow and they also help you grow? So that's week 3 and the final one. With that, we'll pass the mic to Dawn to introduce himself and tell us about his work and his solopreneur journey.
Okay, thank you, Eleanor. I love that description that you had of solopreneurship. It's a new term that I really like. I think it describes really well what I do and many other artists do. I'm very honored to be here today with students of your caliber. I mean that, and I'm kind of envious of your business interests and skills. And I think the more we talk, it'll be obvious why I even say that. Please ask any questions you want, including personal. I would only ask one favor, and that would be to resist the temptation of doing any sort of screen copy on images that I might be showing for copyright issues and also for privacy, because I'm going to be showing you some photographs of people who may not want to have their images go anywhere else. So I'd be grateful if you didn't. There's a wonderful, famous old Dilbert cartoon, which I can't show you for copyright reasons, but a business advisor is talking to a CEO of a company run by artists. And the CEO of that artist-run company is saying, "Whoa, do you mean we need revenue in order to make profit?" And this idea, this stereotypical lack of all business sense by artists is really widespread. But I think it basically just is a misunderstanding of some fundamental dynamics that are involved. Kurt Vonnegut, one of my favorite authors, was addressing a group of graduating students once. And if I could paraphrase him, he said, if you want to hurt your parents and you don't have the courage to do anything else, the least you could do is go into the arts. And, you know, there's an old joke about the difference between art and craft, a perennial argument, ridiculous argument. But the best definition I've ever heard is that if you're a craftsperson, you at least have a chance of making a living. And you know, that punchline to that old joke that I'm crazy, but I'm not stupid. Artists aren't stupid, they're not ignorant, but they do work under very different rules, I think. And that's why, in my experience, every business seminar for artists usually fail. And it fails because of this misunderstanding of how artists work. So many times business savvy people believe that all they need to do is to explain to the artist the secrets of the business world, the importance of a good business plan, a marketing strategy, a presence on social media, all those things that you know well, and that the artist is going to take those home and put them into practice and become successful and wealthy. It never works in my experience. And I think one of the reasons why it doesn't work is because of, let me show you let me see. Whoops, I'm going to go into screen share and it may take me just a second, but it should work here. Okay. Hang on. If this has worked, oh, is that working? Are you picking that up?
No, it's not shared, Don.
Uh-oh. Okay, let me go back. Is there something that you need to do on your end?
It should be enabled.
Because, okay, it's showing up on my screen very nicely. Oh, wait, I think I got it.
There we go.
Okay. Okay. You should have on your screen here in a minute a shirtless man, a black and white photograph. You have that?
Yes.
Well, does anyone recognize this man? Does anyone recognize this man? This is Bob Greene, who's actually was a professor in the business school in 1987. And he came to my studio on Dixon Street when I had first opened it up in that space, which is now Amelia's restaurant. And he needed a portrait taken. The fact that he's shirtless is another story, but that's how he wanted to be photographed. And we struck up a good conversation, and he really liked the final product. But what he realized very quickly was that I didn't have the foggiest idea how to run a business. And so he took pity on me, and he actually assigned my business, which was called Photographers Cooperative, to his marketing class, and they had to break up into groups. It was an end of semester project. They had to come down and interview me and work up an actual marketing plan for my business. Well, it was wonderful for me to meet these creative students and to talk to them. I would give them a tour, get them excited about the photography. But as soon as they started asking me questions, it would fall apart. They would ask me, for example, number one would be, Mr. House, what is your annual budget for advertising and marketing? And my answer would be, I don't have a budget for advertising. How much do you need? And I'll try to raise it for you. And that just doesn't fit with the form that they were filling out. And it really kind of shorted them out, really. But one of the biggest clues that Professor Greene had that I was in trouble was I found it impossible to charge him for the work that I was doing. Because by the time I handed him the print, I felt like we were developing a friendship almost, which is very common with this kind of portraiture. And so to ask him to give me cash was very difficult to do. Still is, in fact. This man, if you may recognize, is a Fayetteville face, Tom Wilkerson, who worked for the largest advertising agency in this region for many years, Blackwood and Martin and Associates. This man is on what I call my board of directors. which we'll talk about in a little bit later. But this is somebody that I can come to for advice on marketing and advertising. He insists on doing it on a gravel bar on the Buffalo River. That's the only way that he will meet me, which is fine with me. And typically when I tell him about the idea that I have, his common answer to me is, Don, hope is not a business plan, but it is a business plan for artists. In fact, it's more than a business plan, it's a business model, truly. I'm going to show you another photograph here. You may recognize this woman. This is Sabina Schmidt. She's a photographer, writer, translator that I've been collaborating with recently on some very interesting projects. And her career in the last 10 years has gone more toward photography and marketing her photographs. And I think she described really well what the problem can be. You know, she says that she's not doing market research and identifying some sort of a need and then providing a service or a product to fill that need. But instead, she's creating very personal work that she feels is important and satisfying. And then she has to find someone who not only appreciates that work, but then is willing to purchase it. It's a very different business animal. In 1996, something happened that changed my whole business. And the Walton Art Center, which was fairly new at the time, asked me if I would do an exhibition. I jumped at it and I put together, I wanted to just show the faces of the people that I photographed in the 10 years since that first one of Bob Greene. And I put together 150 photographs, mounted, framed, installed them in the Walton Art Center. I don't know if you recognize this man, but if you listen to KUAF on Saturday nights in the Picking Post, this is your host, Mike Shirkey, probably about 25 or 30 years ago, and his daughter, Willa and Nina. Well, what changed me about this exhibition, this is a professor at the university and her daughter, a family that had come into Springfest just to be on Dixon Street one year. What I discovered was out of 150 photographs on the wall, there were no more than 4 or 5 that were commissioned portraits. Everything else I had done at my own expense because I wanted to take the photograph of the people. So I would set up at festivals and like Springfest, Autumn Fest, around the region. And then I would just invite people in off the street when I saw them. You may recognize this man. This is Russell Cothran. It's your photographer at the university. He's probably been in your departments before. Probably 25 years ago, he walked into the studio carrying his new vintage camera. And again, what I do with these portraits, as you can see, is I give no instruction. I just give them a palette to work on, a plain backdrop, a chair, and then I walk away. And they do whatever they want to do. And it works out really well. No preconceived notions of anything. Russell is also on my board of directors. He is quite a philosopher, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. But it was the input from the staff at the Walton Art Center that was so interesting. They said they had never seen anything like it, that it was the most attended exhibition to that date. But it was the way people reacted. They described that there would be people yelling at the photographs. They would be sobbing, laughing. They would be flipping the photographs off. They would be touching them, kissing them. And what I realized is that in that 150 photographs over 10 years, that we had put together, just almost inadvertently, put together a real window on the community of Fayetteville, and also fixed in time. And the reason that there was so much emotion often was because there were people who I had photographed who were on those walls who were now dead. There were couples that I photographed who were madly in love and looked like it, and they have divorced, and not amicably so. There are new relationships that had started. Children I photographed at 10 years old were now had children of their own. This is a local dancer, Claudia Smith, and her daughter. And people looking into these faces over a period of 10 years. This is one of your professors, Cindy Wiseman, who teaches in art, and she gets together every 5 years or so with a group of friends over decades, came in to be photographed. during Springfest, there's a group that put together a Mardi Gras band. You would probably know many of these people if you could look closer. They've been on Dixon Street and in Fayetteville forever. This was a local actor who was getting some headshots and wanted to be photographed the way he told me. He said he came in that way because he wanted to get photographed the way he normally feels. If you know the band Trout Fishing in America, this is Ezra Idlets and his family, Karen, who is also a photographer, a photojournalist, 2 children, both of whom you know probably now in the community. This young woman is actually my granddaughter, and she was the face that was presented in all the advertising. Well, I think you see from this that suddenly for me, the product that I was making became more important than the effort to sell it. I realized that this was not going to work the way that I was trying to make it work. So I had to basically rethink what I was doing and change my attitude about what I was doing. And what I came up with that has worked well for me is I just decided, well, let me say first, one thing that I realized was different about and why one of the seminars that I took at the university failed was the man who was speaking was actually had a photography studio in the area. And so I thought, this is going to be perfect. He'll teach me the business aspects of it. But within a few minutes, it became clear that we just had such different attitudes about the kind of work we were doing. So he ran a photography studio until it wasn't as profitable as he wanted anymore. And then he closed it down and opened a video store. And when that wasn't going, after a few years, he opened something else. And he was successful, there's no question, and a very nice person to talk to. But he had no investment in the thing he was doing as a personal investment in it. The product could be almost anything, and he would be successful with it. He didn't put his identity into it like it felt like I was, and almost like I had a responsibility in the community now to continue to record the people who lived here. I'm bringing back Russell Cawthron because this idea of responsibility, Russell has eloquently spoken about, and he is an incredible portrait photographer himself. And this sense of responsibility, not only to the person that you're photographing, of course, but also to the viewer, that there's an assurance that the image you're seeing is an honest portrayal of this person's character and personality. And I feel very strongly about that. Putting a person on a blue background in a big wicker chair, holding a styrofoam baseball bat or something, it doesn't say anything about the person. It says a lot about the photographer, perhaps, and fashion. But what we're trying to portray is who these people are. And if we're successful, they recognize it as well as we do. Let me tell you a little bit about a project that Zabina Schmidt and I worked on a few years ago. We spent 2 years on this down in the Wichita Mountains. If you're not familiar with them, they're down in southwest Oklahoma. Most people have never heard of them, and they think that we're mispronouncing Washita when we say the Wichitas. But they are this unusual, as you can see in this photograph, on the flat Oklahoma prairie. These mountains come up in a very small, relatively small area, and they're really quite incredible. Very long history, Native American history, spiritual spot. It's almost like every aspect of our Western movement and history, good and bad, are represented in this area. This is a typical Zabina Schmidt photograph, how she looks at the things in our project. So she looks at the architecture, the landscape, often places that have been abandoned, that are no longer in use are especially attractive. And then I concentrate on the people. It's a military family. One of the two of the biggest probably draws in this area. One is one of our biggest military training bases, Fort Sill, and also the Wichita Mountain Wildlife Refuge, which was the country's first refuge, started by Teddy Roosevelt to try to save the American bison from extinction. This photo on the right is our grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Chief Quanah Parker, who lived in that area, or surrendered in that area, I should say. Geronimo is buried in this area. So these are just more people, a librarian in a small town library in that area, the owner of a wonderful little cafe in a tiny town. It's another typical Zabina photograph of what would draw her attention that kind of defines a community or gives a sense of what the place is like. Here's a miner, a gypsum miner in a big mine outside that area. It's a small crossroads and an abandoned store. And the interesting, you can see it's an effort to try to define a community in both the people and the place. This is the park ranger at the refuge who doesn't look like a standard park ranger, which probably attracted me. And he gives guided hikes into the area, into these rough areas, the kind of wilderness areas there. This is Sabina's photograph in a Native American cemetery. This is the manager of an odd little place called the Holy City of the Wichitas. Back in the 30s, a preacher decided that the landscape there looked like what he thought Jesus would have known. So he built this whole compound of buildings, and they do a passion play every year, much more involved than you might find at Eureka Springs, but internationally known. And it's right out there in the middle of the prairie. The Blue Goose Station, one of the favorite photographs from this exhibition. And on this project, we put together an exhibition of 40 or so photographs, and they've been on display at the Rockefeller Institute and at Cameron University in Oklahoma. This is the warden of a juvenile detention facility who was kind enough to climb up this rickety ladder into what was at one time the watchtower. And this is a wonderful photo of Sabina's that gives a sense of that area. Wide open flat land and suddenly an uplift of these granite mountains that come out of the prairie. It's beautiful. This is an unofficial deputized lawman in this tiny town of Medicine Park that has this unusual round river stone architecture. There's a pistol on his right hip that you can see if the photo's large enough for you. Okay, here's a summary of that project. We had $11,000 in expenses, mostly for the things you would think. Film and processing, of course, lodging, gas, equipment rental. We had income of $7,000, and that was from 2 exhibition fees and several photographs that Sabina sold. So we had a $4,000 loss, 750 hours unpaid. What would your conclusion be? Well, let me tell you what our conclusion was. We started another project. Now, this project is one we've just finished up. It's called Remote Access, Small Public Libraries in Arkansas. It's coming out in book form in the fall by University Press is going to be releasing it. And again, we just put together the way we normally work. We visited 21 libraries in every region of the state, very small libraries. Sabina would concentrate on the community, the architecture around it, and I would work on the people. This is a man from West Fork who just happened to walk in that day. And I think what's typical about his image is this is a man who was not interested in being photographed and did not come to the library prepared to be photographed. They have no warning. I just set up, and anybody who walks in the library on that day will be photographed if they're willing. So he's willing, and they're almost always willing, because they love their librarians, they love their libraries, and they want to do anything that might help them. Calhoun County, down in the town of Hampton. This also shows kind of what Sabina keys in on, not necessarily the library, but things around it. A local accountant and his niece. You may recognize the Joy Motel in Eureka Springs, of course, and this mother and daughter from Mark Tree. This is a man who walked in the library in the town of Hamburg. This is in cotton plants, a very old club. This is a family in the town of Lynn and who loved the library and came in to get books. And of course, we grabbed them, made them sit down. And this is a grandmother and granddaughter in the town of Parkin. This is a tiny free library that is in Smackover, put up as a Boy Scout Eagle project called the Book Exchange. This young woman is in Cotton Plant. An entire busload of students came in while we were photographing. They go to school in Augusta and are bused back home and dropped off at the library, where they spend the next hour doing homework and with a tutor who's there to try to help all the students in the community achieve. It's a wonderful group of, it gave you hope in the next generation of students. This is the interior of the Kingston Library, very close to us here. And another kind of a typical thing that would draw Sabina's attention, I think, and trying to basically to portray the feel of the library and the feel of the community. This is a couple from Eureka Springs who walked in, and I have been told that they are no longer a couple. So I imagine when this book comes out, that they will have the same pleasure as some of the people at the Walton Arts Center of some emotional response, perhaps. This is the Horatio Garner Library. You can tell by the decorations when we were there. And this is the book storage shed at the St. Paul Library, just down the road on Highway 16. Another great example of not photographing the library, but photographing the feel. There's a large concrete barrier because it's right on a corner downhill, and cars and trucks have a tendency of losing control right there. And this is the librarian in the town of Parkin. And she's dressed up because there's no heat in this library. And we were in the middle of winter, so she has to keep adding clothing as the day continues. This is the library in Norman, which is south of us a little bit. And it's the largest or the smallest freestanding library in North America, according to Guinness. It's not an official like public library in the classic sense, because there are no paid employees. It's totally run by volunteers, a wonderful group of volunteers. This is a photograph of me in action, following the Morrilton Bookmobile, which is a wonderful service that they offer. And this is, I'm taking this photograph of a mother and her son as they're sitting on the steps of the Morrilton Bookmobile. Here's the summary of this project: $21,000 in expenses, income of $3,000. We applied for 5 grants. None of them were funded. We lost $18,000, 2 years unpaid. What would your conclusion be? Well, for me, it's part of that change that took place at the Walton Arts Center, is that when I started looking at my business different, I began to think of my business in terms of a nonprofit, and not in a jokey way. I don't mean it as it's a nonprofit because we're not making money, but to think of it in how I'm thinking of funding it and working in it as a social nonprofit. And so I look at funding it and surviving in it the way that probably a development officer would look at working in a nonprofit. I mean, you would be doing everything you can to raise money for the good work that you think you're doing. And that you'd be applying for grants, loans, you'd be doing art auctions, you might teach workshops, sell photographs, open studio events, crowdfunding. You might have a partner who has a real job and a sense of humor. That sometimes comes in handy. And you will do part-time and full-time work. I mean, part-time, as we know, there's a cliche of every white person in New York and LA are songwriters or actors and writers. And there's a legitimacy to that. Working part-time to fund your projects is a very good way of doing it. And in fact, working full-time when you have a goal in mind can really be useful. And I've done that several times. Someone famously said that, with any issue, there's only 2 possible scenarios. I mean, if something that's a problem for you, either you change it or you change your attitude about it. And I think what I did was change my attitude. And if you are working full-time somewhere at a job you don't care for, it's really tolerable if you know you're going to quit there in 6 months to a year because you've gotten the money you needed to do this project that you'd like to do. And so this combination of all these forms of raising funds. And what I've done is put together what I call a board of directors. It's not official, but I think of it in terms as exactly what you would do for a nonprofit. So Tom Wilkerson and Russell Cothran, and there are many others. And these are people that I can go to who have expertise in certain areas and who are willing to give me a little bit of their time. I'm not asking a lot, but I found that especially people who are retired from the areas that I'm really interested in are especially willing to talk to you. They're honored that you're asking, and they're out of their own chaos that would have made it difficult for them to give you time. And now they'll sit down with you with a cup of coffee that you buy, of course, and you talk about the questions you have, and they give you the time and at least the resources or a person to talk to. I've developed that over time, but I wish I had done it much earlier proactively to put that list together of people who can help me in those different fields. And you know, one of my part-time jobs was working at Shiloh Museum of Ozark History in Springdale. And in looking at all those old photographs that I would print for them and the testimonials and the letters from early pioneers, what became really clear to me was that the people who settled this area, and not just the earliest, but the rural people in this area up to the 60s, probably 1960s, they were solopreneurs. These farmers were exactly fit that definition. They had a way of life that they were trying to maintain. And the only way they could maintain that often was to go do the things that I'm talking about. They would have to figure out some way of making cash. And they would look with disdain on full-time employment for wages, but they would go and work in the Oklahoma oil fields for a year, bring that money back and continue farming. Or they would go out to Washington and pick fruit for a season and come back. I mean, these early people were doing exactly what we're talking about today and doing it very effectively. Let me show you another photograph. Some time ago, I was involved in a failing personal relationship. And now that you've met me, I know that's really hard for you to imagine, but I had to go see a counselor. And this counselor, his name is William Sims. Don't bother trying to make an appointment because he's recently retired and he won't take your call. But he's on my board of directors as well. And when I went to him, he listened to me rant on and on about what was wrong with this relationship, how unfair this other person was. And he finally stopped me and he made me do an exercise. It was a very powerful one. And he said to go back in time, knowing what you know now, go back in time to the first date, the first conversation, the first time you know you're falling in love. And think about it as a prenuptial contract. If the person had have laid a contract on the table that specified, this is what I will do, this is what I will never do in this relationship, this is what I expect of you, this is what I expect you will never do, etc. And you know it's accurate because you've already lived it. The question really is, would you take the deal? Would you go for it? Would you still start the relationship? It's a very powerful exercise if you do it when you're not either terribly depressed or really pissed off at the person in question. But if you can answer it honestly, it requires that you ponder some very important things, like what is really important and what isn't to me. And then the other, of course, you may end up pondering the difference between happiness and joy, perhaps, which is also an extremely important question. Well, I would submit to you that what I was doing, and I still do, is to every once in a while do that for my business. So I ask myself the question, knowing if I knew then what I know now, would I still do that project? Would I still take that job? Would I still be doing this work? And for each of these, for those projects that I showed you, which a cumulative loss of $23,000 or $24,000, et cetera, and years unpaid, my answer would be absolutely. I would take that deal. I would do it. And what I like about that exercise too is that you get to use business terms like contracts and deals and agreements. Well, I think a question that I would say that, Eleanor mentioned passion earlier, and often that question is answered sometimes, what is your passion, or follow your passion? But I have found that passion isn't the right word for me, because I've found that passion is like a love affair. I mean, it changes over time. It waxes and wanes, and you go on to different things. But the question that I think really is appropriate would be to say, when do you most feel alive? And that doesn't change over time in my experience. From about the time you were 12, when you think about it, the answer would probably be pretty much the same. There's something very deep about that, of when you feel most alive. And I would ask that question at various times to make sure that we're on the right track. When I was first started my business, I used to hang out at a place on Dixon Street called the Smokehouse. It's where Puritan Coffee is now. And I would go there and have coffee, and I would loudly complain to anybody who was willing to listen about how difficult it was to try to sell fine art photography to Philistines. And finally, somebody came over and told me that I needed to meet a man named Ken Smith. And Ken Smith wrote this book. You may have seen it, The Buffalo River Country. He wrote it in 1967. And it's considered to be pivotal in the campaign to save the Buffalo River from being dammed, because he showed photographs and in writing how people were enjoying the river, what it looked like, all the assets of that river. And then he went on and he wrote Buffalo River Handbook, a couple updates of that. If you don't have this book and you like the Buffalo, I guarantee you it's mandatory. You take it with you to the gravel bars, and he will tell you everything that you're seeing, everyone who used to live there before you came there, and the flora and fauna that you're noticing. Well, Ken came in and had his portrait taken on the right there years ago. He wanted an author photo, and I don't think that's what he had in mind, but that portrait of him is, I think, displays his personality and character really well. And the photograph on the left was taken in a canoe. I'm in the front paddling, he's in the back, and I turn with my camera and snap this photograph of him, which is probably, to me, it defines this man and the work that he does. And this photograph, which was taken at Buffalo Point Campground, that's a big box elder tree, an ancient tree there that Ken is sitting at the picnic table, his tent nearby, and he's got his old Stanley thermos and a very Spartan dinner there that he is eating. And he's getting ready to do a 3-day float on the Buffalo to finish up the research on his handbook, to find some lost cemeteries that he's known about, but he wants to find. And after I took this photo, I went and sat at the table with him and shared dinner with him. And I asked him this question that we're kind of dealing with today. How were you able to do this work for 50 years that you have loved to do and that you felt was important? And he said that it simply was working hard for 50 years and then hoping when you're done, you have something important, something of value. And he said that I have no advice, Don, for you whatsoever on how to make money. I have lived a life of thoughtful frugality. And with those words of wisdom, I will leave you to your questions and turn you back over to Eleanor. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this.
Don, thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. For those with questions, please feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat, and I can either call on you or read the question. I'll start off with a question here though, Don. You talk a lot about creating that community and how important it is, and I think that's so true, because I think the term solopreneur is a misnomer in that you are very rarely totally alone in that venture. How would you suggest going about creating that community yourself?
Well, excellent. Because I thought about that, like how I could have done it earlier in a more coordinated way. I think, well, first of all, I would start with probably the coffee shop that I hang out, and just talking to people and telling them what I'm looking for. I would definitely go to my branch manager of my bank, and what you're looking for are people who get it, basically. I mean, sometimes I've talked to financial advisors, for example, that it's like there's a formula only. So if you talk about retirement, I mean, they'll say you're going to need $5.2 million to do this, and they don't get the fact that that is not going to happen. And if you tell them it's not going to happen, then the conversation ends. So you're looking for people who can get the fact that there are different lifestyles in the world, and artists kind of represent one. But I've found a lot of people truly that are interested in the art. They're willing to trade sometimes for your art. They do develop an interest in you, and they like to refer you to other people. So I'd start with the bank, start with my accountant, and then just ask them if they know people, and then start the process. No other secret.
John, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, first, thank you, Don, so much for doing this. This has been great. I joined late. And I'm not sure that I have a question, but it's just a reinforcement for one person who's on the webinar here, Fareed. I think, Fareed, your vision of what you want to do for Afghanistan and your home country and everything else really connects with the Ken Smith story that Don just told. And Ken's still around. He's in the neighborhood. Maybe we can meet up with him sometime. But using art, using storytelling, using all the things you're already doing to as a means of art, but also as a means of social impact is just, I think that's the story of Ken Smith.
Thank you, John. I actually, Don, I noted down the Buffalo River Handbook. I've heard lots about it, and as John knows me really deeply, that he could attest to this. I felt those, when all of these come together to serve a purpose, and that for the artist to live by thoughtful frugality. That was a great way to end it. I had a question from you, and I think maybe I will, ask it in a way to the audience as well. I think that in the second part of your presentation, what you were telling us was the importance of asking questions from yourself, like the question about knowing it then, what I know now, would I still do it? When do you feel the most alive? I think that, when, for instance, if you go to the bank manager and ask all these scripted rules that doesn't really apply to the artist, I think that you're encouraging us younger artists to start asking these questions, because by asking them and really pondering on them is when you can find the answers and, start to look out to people like Ken Smith. I love that you would just rant about it in the cafe, when you were much younger and people pointed you to Ken Smith. I think that signifies the importance of just, saying it and eventually someone hearing it. Do you have some more thoughts to share on that?
Well, I think you described it beautifully, Fareed. And I'm forgetting now, there was the name of the mountain climber who kind of put this together in this sense of when you voice the project, when you put it into words, how things start to seem to fall together to make it happen. And I found that to be very true in starting these projects that we've done, the two I showed you and many others. It's like when you announce that you're going to do it, no matter how ridiculous it might be, you announce that you're going to do it, and it starts the process going. And then you've bought into it yourself, and people are now expecting it. And that's the kind of inspiration that I need to keep moving anyway.
I love that you just mentioned that, because I think half of starting it is just announcing to the world that you're starting something, and now you've said it, and there's only one way to do it, is to start it. So I think that I too have found that, by these days on social media, if you want to do something, if I announce on social media, then I'm held accountable by the expectations of people. And that's one source of motivation that I derive. I think that for people in call today, whether you're starting or not, I think this is a wonderful thing, is to I think that was a theme in today's first workshop in the series of the 3, to literally get it out of your head and start doing it. And I think that announcing it is one, the first step to do that. I think,
Agreed.
Eleanor, if we want to take questions continue to take questions from the audience, please, this is a great time to ask from Dawn. Simon, you have your hand raised, please, your turn.
Hey, Don. So earlier, I think you said that life isn't just a plan, it's more of like a business model. I-
Life in the 20. So Simon, you cut out. Can you repeat that?
well, I said that earlier, were talking about life not just being a plan, that's more of like a business model. And I was just wondering, like, if you could like expound on that, because I didn't really understand it.
I'm not sure if that's exactly what I meant, that life is a business model. I think it was, I might just flip that around. I was thinking more like is to, you know, bring life into your business. I mean, that I'm treating my business differently than maybe traditional approaches might be. And it's all wrapped up in your life story and your life vision. And I think I'm trying to keep those not separate. At least they're not in my life. But I'm not trying to make a kind of an analogy or something that way, that life is a business. I think I would reverse that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, if we don't have any more questions at this moment, I'm going to let Fareed take over the screen, and he's going to talk exactly on that idea of you just have to start it, explaining business model canvases. So Fareed, you want to take it away?
Absolutely. And I think this is a great segue, especially as I mentioned earlier, Dawn, with the stress on asking questions and really thoughtfulness on what is it that you specifically as an artist need, because our needs are very different than the traditional business environment. So for that, as a practical takeaway for people who are planning to embark on their own solopreneur journeys, we're going to share the business model canvas right now, which is actually used in the business world. But instead of asking people to, instead of people taking this as a thing to do before they start the business, the most important thing we wish that the participants would get out of this is the questions, because the canvas really helps you think about your business and really think about what is it that you're offering, who are you going to offer, and how are you going to do it, and who are the key people that you need to talk to. Your own board of directors, name 4 people in Fayetteville in the university that are going to be really helpful. So I'm going to start, and please, by no means, this is not, if anything we want for people to get out of this workshop is not, we're not teaching anything. We're helping you expand the resources so that then you can take it onto yourself. So this next bit is not, it's not anything related to class training. It's something that would be really, really helpful. Awesome. So the business model canvas was created for early starters, just to think about the business and all aspects of it. So in here, we'll share this document with you. There are 2 parts. There's the learn part that you can learn more about the business model canvas, and the create part. There are some softwares and the canvas itself here. This is what it would look like. And what I would do is, so this will take you to the page, you can download it, and this is how everybody has my screen, right?
Yes, we see it.
Awesome. So
I got it.
this is basically the business model canvas has 9 building blocks. It starts with the value proposition, and there are these questions that you can really take some time to answer. What is the value you're trying to convey to the customer? So if you're a photographer, is it the importance of relationship between person and community, for instance? Like, you can get really, really granular about the answers to these questions. And then the same way, you need to think about who out there in the world will pick an interest in my work. And how am I going to reach these people? Social media, Instagram, newsletters, displays, an exhibit in Walton Art Center, and what kind of relationship do I want to build with these people so that they continue to come to you as the artist and solopreneur. And then on the left side here is more the back end, key partners, like I mentioned earlier. I think I would continue to use Don's analogy of your board of directors, your personal board of directors. Who are these people? And what activities do you need to start doing in order to start getting the values that you're creating to your customers? So do you need to talk to a bank? Do you need to raise some money? Do you need to set up the first things, basically? And you can treat the business model canvas such that you can always come back to it and update it. So you can have phases of the business model canvas, like the very early start, you accomplish those things, then you come back to it a month later, a year later, and then you can also play with the cost structure and revenue streams. So this is what the canvas will look like. What I would do personally if I were embarking on a project is print this in the biggest paper possible and paste it on my wall and start putting sticky notes on it. And then again, we'll share this document with you. Here's the official business model canvas website that has more info on it. You can learn more. There's more resources. Here's a PDF of the book that they wrote. This is the free version. This doesn't have everything, but it has enough. It helps you. It has more examples of like what values, what are some traditional value propositions. It basically helps you get some ideas from what's already out there. And then once you spend some time learning about this, you can go about creating. You can either, like I said, print in a big paper and as an exercise, paste it on a wall. You can also there are a couple softwares online, Canvanizer, it has a free version and a paid version. And basically it allows you to put sticky notes on the web, just like it's showing here. Strategizer is similar, but it's more complicated. It's more complex. It has more of the cost and revenue stream structure attached to it. It has a free month-long trial, but I think that's a great way to take advantage of it and play around with it. So I would, if you have your solopreneur idea, definitely start there. And I don't know where, stop share. There we go.
Go ahead, George.
So that's, it's a great exercise to get the idea out on paper. Think about, key people that can help you. Who are you trying to reach out to with your product? What resources you need, and at the very least, it just gets you started. The most important step, I think, in starting a solopreneur journey is to get the idea out of your head and before people. And this is the business model canvas does that.
Real quick, so that's a really useful tool, I think. But the most important thing about it is it's only one page and it's super simple. This is coming from a strategy professor who has taught all manner of strategic planning processes, and at the ripe old age that I'm at, believe that simple, super simple, and then simpler is better. Those categories are fine. I don't think they're canonical. I don't think there's anything law-like about the categories they've come up with. So if you've got a business idea, or if you've got a nonprofit idea, or if you just don't think in those terms, come up with your own categories, right? I mean, so everyone, whether they want to or not, has to deal with revenues and expenses and things like that. But this notion of value proposition can be reworded in lots of different ways, especially if you're an artist, of how you create, what you create, this just the notion of creation. Channels sounds so impersonal, right? But partners or clientele or patrons or whatever it is. So I would just emphasize that you don't really need to overthink that. In fact, the whole value of the business model or the business canvas or these different canvases is to keep it as simple as you possibly can. No need for online strategizers. Apology to strategizer.
Well, I think we have reached the end here. I want to thank Don House again for that fantastic talk and those beautiful images. And you all for being here. I know it is our pseudo spring break week, and that makes things difficult. But I definitely appreciate it. And thank you, Madison, for hosting us. If you have any questions, I will drop my email, and I think Fareed can drop his in the chat, and feel free to reach out to us at any time. And please join us next week when we talk about the equally fun activity of taxes and forms.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. And I did drop a link in the chat. If you haven't already, we are always looking for feedback on these workshops. So if we could take a few minutes of your time for your feedback, we'd greatly appreciate it. And like Eleanor said, please join us next week. Same time, different place, different Zoom link, but we hope to see you there. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Don. It was great having you.